The galaxy's Mercs will fight anything except human warships. Captain Zextar adjusted his 4 eyes to focus on the holographic display floating before him. The massive space station Nexus Prime hummed with activity as dozens of alien species moved through its corridors, all seeking the same thing: profitable mercenary contracts. The Galactic Mercenary Guild had been the backbone of interstellar conflict resolution for over 3 centuries, and business had never been better. Another revolt on Kepler 7, his communications officer, a 6-armed hexapod named Crix, announced from across the bridge. Mining colonies refusing to pay taxes to the Centauri Federation. Standard suppression contract. Payment is 2 million credits. Zextar's mandibles clicked with satisfaction. His crew, the Stellar Reapers, had built their reputation on taking the jobs others considered too dangerous. They had fought rogue AI fleets, quelled rebellions on a dozen worlds, and even taken on the legendary Void Hunters of the Andromeda Spiral. In the mercenary business, fear was just another word for respect, and respect meant higher pay rates. "Accept the contract," Zextar commanded, his translated voice echoing through the bridge. "Plot a course for the Kepler system. We leave within the hour." But as Crix began processing the acceptance, his multiple arms suddenly froze over the control panel. His normally blue skin shifted to a pale gray, a sign of distress among his species. "Captain," Crix's voice wavered, "I'm reading additional information in the contract database. There's a notation here about human involvement." The bridge fell silent. Even the constant hum of the life support system seemed to quiet. Zextar's 4 eyes narrowed as he leaned forward in his command chair. "Explain," he demanded. "The miners have hired human security consultants. 3 ships are reportedly en route to the system." Crix paused, his arms trembling slightly. "The classification shows them as military vessels." Zextar's blood ran cold through his veins. Like every mercenary captain in the galaxy, he knew the stories. Humans had only joined the galactic community 50 years ago, but their reputation preceded them like a supernova's shockwave. They were the species that had somehow survived their own planet's attempts to kill them, then proceeded to thrive in environments that would destroy most other life forms. "Cancel the contract," Zextar said quietly. "Sir?" Crix's confusion was evident in his voice. "The payment is substantial, and these are just miners. Surely 3 human ships cannot—" "Cancel it now!" Zextar's voice boomed across the bridge. His crew had never heard their captain sound afraid before, and the fear in his voice was contagious. Across the galaxy, similar scenes played out on hundreds of mercenary vessels. The news spread through the guild's networks like wildfire. Humans were involved in the Kepler 7 situation. Within hours, over 90% of the available mercenary fleets had withdrawn their bids for the contract. Commander Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Determination, watching the tactical display with amusement. The human vessel was modest by galactic standards, only 300 meters long and crewed by just 200 personnel. Its sister ships, the Resilience and the Defiance, maintained formation on either side as they approached the Kepler system. "Commander," Lieutenant Rodriguez called from the communications station, "we're receiving withdrawal notifications from mercenary fleets. Looks like they're all pulling out of the system." "All of them?" Chen raised an eyebrow. 97%, ma'am. The few remaining are requesting additional hazard pay and asking for confirmation that we won't engage their vessels." Chen shook her head in bewilderment. When Earth had first made contact with the galactic community, they had been shocked to learn that most interstellar conflicts were handled by professional mercenary organizations. The idea seemed almost quaint to humans, who had spent millennia perfecting the art of warfare out of necessity. "Open a channel to the mining colonies," Chen ordered. "Let them know we're 12 hours out." The response came back within minutes, filled with gratitude and relief. The miners had been facing overwhelming odds. The Centauri Federation had hired the largest mercenary fleet in the sector to crush their rebellion. Now, with most of those mercenaries fleeing at the mere mention of human involvement, the balance had shifted dramatically. But not everyone was retreating. Captain Vorth of the mercenary vessel Bone Crusher was known throughout the galaxy for his ruthlessness and his pride. The 7-foot-tall Krillian had never backed down from a fight, and he wasn't about to start now, especially not because of some upstart species that had barely crawled out of their home system. "Humans!" he snarled to his crew, his razor-sharp teeth gleaming under the bridge lighting. "They're just another soft species hiding behind propaganda and fear. We've fought the Void Hunters and survived. We've battled the machine fleets of Zerion Prime. What can 3 small ships possibly do to us?" His crew, a mix of battle-hardened aliens from a dozen different worlds, nodded in agreement. They had built their reputation on taking the contracts others wouldn't touch. The Bone Crusher and its escort vessels represented some of the most experienced fighters in the galaxy. "Besides," Vorth continued, "the Federation is offering triple rates for anyone willing to stay and complete the mission. That's 18 million credits, crew. Enough to retire on." The greed in their eyes was unmistakable. 18 million credits split among 3 ships was more than most mercenaries saw in a lifetime. The risk seemed minimal. After all, what could 3 human ships do against a fleet of experienced killers? As the human task force entered the Kepler system, they immediately detected the Federation fleet waiting for them. 15 mercenary vessels of various sizes, led by the massive Bone Crusher. It should have been an intimidating sight, enough firepower to level a small moon. "Enemy fleet detected," reported Ensign Park from the sensor station. 15 vessels, mixed configuration. They're holding position near the 4th planet. Commander Chen studied the tactical display. The mercenary fleet had positioned themselves between the human ships and the mining colonies on Kepler 7's moons. It was a solid tactical position, forcing any rescue attempt to go through them. "Standard approach," Chen ordered calmly. "All ships maintain formation, weapons powered, but not targeted." On the Bone Crusher's bridge, Captain Vorth watched the human ships approach with growing confidence. They weren't even trying to be clever. No fancy maneuvers, no attempt to use the system's asteroid belt for cover. They were flying straight toward his fleet like lambs to slaughter. "Human vessel," Vorth broadcast on an open channel. "You are outnumbered 5 to 1. Withdraw from this system immediately, or we will be forced to destroy you." The response came back within seconds, delivered in the calm, steady voice that would soon become legendary across the galaxy. "This is Commander Chen of the United Earthship Determination. We are here at the request of the Kepler 7 mining colonies to provide security consultation. We have no intention of withdrawing." Vorth's laugh echoed through his bridge. "Security consultation? You're here to fight, human, and you're about to learn why the galaxy fears professional warriors." "We're here to do a job," Chen replied simply. "Nothing more, nothing less." The casual tone in her voice sent an unexpected chill down Vorth's spine. In his decades of experience, he had learned to read the voices of his enemies. Fear, anger, desperation. These were emotions he understood and could exploit. But there was something different in the human's voice. Not confidence exactly, but something else. Something that reminded him of the way predators sounded just before they struck. "Last warning, human. Withdraw or be destroyed." "Negative. We have a contract to fulfill." Vorth severed the connection and turned to his weapons officer. "Target their lead vessel. All ships, prepare to fire on my command." But as his fleet powered up their weapon systems, something unexpected happened. The human ships didn't respond with typical defensive measures. They didn't raise additional shields or begin evasive maneuvers. Instead, they did something that sent a wave of unease through every mercenary crew in the system. They began to spread out. It wasn't a retreat or a flanking maneuver. The three human ships simply increased the distance between themselves, forming a wide triangle that would make it impossible to concentrate fire on all of them simultaneously. It was such a simple tactical adjustment, yet something about the calm precision with which they executed it made Vorth's crew exchange nervous glances. "Sir," his sensor operator reported, voice uncertain, "I'm reading some unusual energy signatures from their vessels. Their power output is strange." "Explain strange," Vorth demanded. "It's like they're running systems we can't identify. Their energy patterns don't match any known technology in our databases." Vorth dismissed the concern with a wave of his clawed hand. "Probably just their primitive human technology. All ships, lock targets, and prepare to fire." 15 mercenary vessels trained their weapons on the approaching human ships. Plasma cannons, particle beams, and kinetic projectiles all hummed with deadly energy. It should have been over in seconds. "Fire!" Vorth commanded. The space between the fleets erupted in brilliant light as dozens of weapons discharged simultaneously. The void filled with streaks of energy and clouds of superheated plasma. It was a coordinated barrage that should have vaporized the human vessels instantly. But when the energy dissipated and the sensors cleared, all three human ships were not only intact, they were exactly where they had been before the attack began. "Impossible," whispered Vorth's tactical officer. "Nothing could have survived that barrage." "Damage report on the human vessels," Vorth demanded. His sensor operator worked frantically at his console for several long moments before looking up with an expression of disbelief. "Sir, I'm reading 0 damage to any of the human ships. Their hull integrity remains at 100%. The bridge fell silent except for the hum of the ship's systems. Vorth stared at the tactical display, trying to process what he was seeing. His fleet had just unleashed enough firepower to destroy a battle station, and the humans hadn't even bothered to dodge. Then Commander Chen's voice came through the communications system again, still calm and professional. "That was quite a light show. Are you finished with your demonstration?" The casual dismissal of his fleet's attack hit Vorth like a physical blow. In 40 years of mercenary work, he had never encountered anything like this. Ships that could shrug off that level of concentrated fire simply didn't exist. "Impossible," he muttered. "No shields are that strong." His communications officer looked up from his station with wide eyes. "Captain, I'm receiving priority messages from other mercenary fleets throughout the galaxy. They're all saying the same thing. Abort the mission immediately." "What are they talking about?" "Sir, they're sending us historical data files about human military engagements. There's something here about the siege of Europa Station and—" The officer's voice trailed off as he read the information. "Captain, according to these files, a single human vessel once held off an entire pirate armada for 6 days without taking significant damage." Vorth snatched the data pad from his officer's hands and began reading. What he found there challenged everything he thought he knew about warfare in the galaxy. Humans didn't just fight differently, they fought in ways that seemed to ignore the established rules of physics and military science. But his pride wouldn't let him retreat. Not in front of his crew, and not in front of the galaxy that was undoubtedly watching this confrontation. "Prepare for a second volley," he ordered. "All ships, maximum power, everything we have." As his fleet recharged their weapons, Vorth noticed something that made his blood run cold. The human ships weren't just sitting there waiting for another attack. They were moving again, but not in any pattern he recognized. They seemed to be positioning themselves for something, but he couldn't figure out what. "Human ships are changing formation," his tactical officer reported. "I'm not sure what they're doing, sir. The formation doesn't match any known military doctrine." Vorth watched as the 3 human vessels shifted into a configuration that looked almost casual. They weren't presenting a unified front or trying to maximize their defensive capabilities. If anything, they looked like they were setting up for a friendly conversation rather than a battle. "Sir, weapon systems are charged and ready," his weapons officer announced. "Fire everything," Vorth commanded. Once again, space lit up with the fury of 15 mercenary vessels unleashing their full arsenal. This time, they held nothing back. Every weapon system, every piece of military hardware they possessed, was brought to bear on the human ships. And once again, when the light faded, the 3 human vessels remained exactly where they had been, completely undamaged. But this time, Commander Chen's response was different. "Our turn," she said simply. The words sent a chill through every mercenary ship in the system. For the first time since the engagement began, the human vessels powered up their weapon systems. The energy readings that appeared on Vorth's sensors made no sense. The humans were generating power levels that should have been impossible for ships of their size. "What are those readings?" Vorth demanded. "I don't know, sir. The power output is beyond anything in our databases. It's like their entire ships are weapons." That was when Vorth realized the terrible truth. The galaxy's mercenaries had built their reputation on being the toughest, most dangerous fighters in known space. They had faced every threat the universe could throw at them and emerged victorious. But they had never faced humans before. And now, as the 3 human ships began to glow with an energy that made his sensors scream warnings, Captain Vorth finally understood why every other mercenary fleet in the galaxy had fled at the first mention of human involvement. The humans weren't just another species with advanced technology. They were something else entirely, something that the galaxy had never seen before and was completely unprepared to face. The last thing Vorth heard before his world changed forever was Commander Chen's voice, still calm and professional, delivering a message that would echo through mercenary guilds across the galaxy for generations to come. "This is what happens when you threaten our clients. The galaxy's Mercs will fight anything, except human warships." Part 2. The UES Determination fired a single shot. It wasn't the spectacular display of firepower that the mercenaries expected. No massive beam of energy, no swarm of missiles, no exotic particle weapons that lit up the void. Just one projectile, no larger than a human fist, launched from the ship's primary weapon system. Captain Vorth watched it approach on his sensors, confusion replacing fear for a moment. After withstanding the combined firepower of 15 ships, the humans were responding with a single tiny projectile? It had to be some kind of joke. "Evasive maneuvers," he ordered anyway, unwilling to take any chances. The bone crusher began to turn, its massive bulk slowly rotating to present a smaller target, but the projectile seemed to anticipate the movement. As Vorth watched in growing horror, the small object adjusted its trajectory with impossible precision, curving through space like it was guided by some invisible hand. "Impact in 3 seconds, his tactical officer reported. "Brace for—" Vorth began, but he never finished the sentence. The projectile struck the bone crusher's primary hull section and simply disappeared into it, like a drop of water falling into an ocean. For a moment, nothing happened. The massive mercenary vessel continued its turn, its systems functioning normally. Then the ship began to come apart. It didn't explode in a brilliant flash of energy like ships destroyed by conventional weapons. Instead, it simply started to disintegrate from the point of impact outward. Hull plates separated along their molecular bonds. Support beams twisted and flowed like liquid metal. The entire structure began to collapse in on itself as if the fundamental forces holding it together had suddenly forgotten how to work. "What is happening to our ship?" Vorth screamed, but his crew had no answers. Their instruments couldn't explain what they were seeing because it defied everything they understood about physics and engineering. The process took exactly 37 seconds. When it was complete, the massive bone crusher had been reduced to a slowly expanding cloud of component materials. Not debris from an explosion, but the actual raw elements that had once formed a starship, separated and organized with impossible precision. Throughout the system, the 14 remaining mercenary ships watched in stunned silence. Their sensors recorded everything, but their computers couldn't process the data. How do you analyze a weapon that doesn't destroy matter, but simply convinces it to stop being a spaceship? Commander Chen's voice cut through the silence with the same professional calm she had maintained throughout the engagement. Bone Crusher has been disabled. Remaining vessels have 30 seconds to power down weapons and withdraw from the system. On the bridge of the mercenary vessel, Crimson Talon, Captain Hess stared at her tactical display in disbelief. She had served in mercenary fleets for over 2 decades, had seen weapons that could crack planets and defenses, that could stop small suns, but nothing in her experience had prepared her for what she had just witnessed. "Captain," her communications officer whispered, "I'm receiving surrender signals from 8 of our remaining ships. They're requesting permission to withdraw." Hess nodded slowly. She understood the fear in her fellow captains' voices. The humans had just demonstrated a level of technological superiority that rendered conventional warfare meaningless. But she also understood something else: the economic implications of retreat. "Open a channel to the human commander," she ordered. "Commander Chen," Hess began, when the connection was established. "I am Captain Hess of the Crimson Talon. What you've done here, we need to understand what we're dealing with." "You're dealing with a security consultation," Chen replied evenly. "Nothing more complicated than that." "You just destroyed the most powerful mercenary vessel in this sector with a single shot," Hess protested. "That's not a security consultation. That's a declaration of supremacy." There was a pause before Chen responded, and when she did, there was something almost like sympathy in her voice. "Captain Hess, we didn't come here to fight you. We came here to protect our clients. You chose to make it a fight." "But how?" Hess asked, abandoning all pretense of military protocol. "How did you do that to Vorth's ship?" "Does it matter? The question you should be asking is whether you want to find out firsthand." Hess looked around her bridge at her crew's terrified faces. These were veteran fighters who had faced death countless times without flinching, but the casual destruction of the Bone Crusher had shaken them to their core. They weren't looking at her like a captain anymore. They were looking at her like someone who held their lives in her hands. "All ships," she announced on the fleet channel, "power down weapons and withdraw to minimum safe distance." One by one, the remaining mercenary vessels began to comply. Energy signatures dimmed as weapon systems powered down. Ships that had been bristling with deadly intent just minutes before now drifted helplessly in space like leaves on a calm pond. But not all of them were ready to surrender. Captain Zaris of the assault frigate Void Ripper was young for a mercenary commander, having earned his position through a combination of tactical brilliance and ruthless ambition. Unlike the older captains who had lived long enough to develop a healthy respect for superior firepower, Zaris still believed that cleverness and determination could overcome any advantage. "They're just 3 ships," he muttered to his crew, ignoring the withdrawal orders from the fleet commander. "Whatever weapon they used, it has to have limitations. No technology is perfect." His tactical officer, a nervous Zalithian named Quex, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Sir, perhaps we should consider—" "Consider what? Running away like cowards because of some parlor trick?" Zaris snarled. "They destroyed 1 ship. 1. For all we know, that weapon takes hours to recharge, or maybe they only have a few shots." Quex wanted to point out that even a few shots from such a weapon would be more than enough to destroy their entire fleet, but he knew better than to argue with his captain when Zaris was in this mood. "Besides," Zaris continued, studying the tactical display, "look at how they're positioned. They're spread out in a wide formation, probably to avoid being caught in a single area effect attack. That means they can't provide mutual support if we hit them fast enough." It was sound tactical thinking based on conventional military doctrine. Under normal circumstances, Xeris would have been right. Dispersed ships were vulnerable to concentrated assault if an enemy could close the distance quickly enough, but these weren't normal circumstances. "Plot an intercept course for the lead vessel," Xeris ordered. "Maximum speed. We're going to ram them." The Void Ripper was designed for exactly this kind of assault. Small, fast, and heavily armored, it could accelerate to ramming speed faster than most ships could lock weapons. It was a desperate tactic, but desperate tactics sometimes worked when conventional approaches failed. "Sir, are you sure about this?" Quex asked. "I'm sure. Initiate burn on my mark." The assault frigate's engines roared to life, pushing the ship toward the UES Determination at an acceleration that would have killed most organic crews. But mercenary ships were built tough, and their crews were tougher. On the Determination's bridge, Lieutenant Rodriguez noticed the incoming ship immediately. "Commander, we have a hostile vessel approaching at attack speed. ETA to impact, 45 seconds. Chen turned to study the tactical display, with the same calm interest she might show when examining a weather report. "Just one ship?" "Yes, ma'am. The others are maintaining their withdrawal." Ensign Park, what's your assessment?" The young sensor operator consulted his readings before responding. "Based on the vessel's mass and current velocity, impact would cause significant structural damage to our forward sections. Recommend evasive maneuvers or defensive fire." Chen nodded thoughtfully. "And how long would it take us to maneuver out of their path?" "Approximately 15 seconds, ma'am." "I see." Chen watched the approaching ship for a moment longer, then made a decision that would be analyzed in military academies across the galaxy for decades to come. "All stations, maintain current position and heading." The bridge crew exchanged glances, but no one questioned the order. They had learned to trust their commander's judgment, even when that judgment seemed to defy common sense. On the Void Ripper, Xeris watched the human ship growing larger in his view screen and felt a surge of savage satisfaction. They weren't even trying to dodge. Whatever technological advantage the humans possessed, they had clearly grown overconfident. In 30 seconds, his ship would slam into theirs and prove that human ships could be destroyed just like any other. 20 seconds, 10 seconds, 5. At the last possible moment, something impossible happened. The UES Determination simply wasn't there anymore. Xeris blinked, certain that his eyes were deceiving him. 1 second, the human vessel had been directly ahead, growing larger with each passing moment. The next second, empty space filled his view screen. "Where did they go?" he demanded. Queck stared at his sensor readings in confusion. "Sir, I'm showing the human ship at bearing 274 Mark 18, distance 3,000 kilometers. That's impossible. There's no way a ship that size could maneuver that quickly." "Sir," Quex's voice was very small. "According to my readings, they didn't maneuver. They just moved." Before Xeris could process this information, Commander Chen's voice filled his bridge. "That was an impressive display of courage, Captain. Unfortunately, courage without wisdom tends to be short-lived." "How did you do that?" Xeris demanded. "Trade secret," Chen replied. "Now you have two options. You can power down your weapons and withdraw with the rest of your fleet, or you can continue your attack and share Captain Vorth's fate." Xeris looked around his bridge at his crew's faces. The casual way the human ship had simply appeared in a completely different location had shaken them even more than the destruction of the Bone Crusher. At least that had been a demonstration of superior firepower, something they could understand, even if they couldn't match it. But ships that could move through space without traveling through the intervening distance suggested technology so far beyond their understanding that resistance seemed pointless. We withdraw," Xeris said finally. "Wise choice. Safe travels, Captain." As the Void Ripper limped away to join the other retreating mercenary vessels, Captain Hess opened a private channel to the human commander. Commander Chen, I need to ask you something, and I hope you'll give me an honest answer. I'll try. What are you people? I've been fighting in space for 23 years, and I've never seen anything like what you just did. Ships that can ignore weapons fire, weapons that unmake matter, instantaneous movement across thousands of kilometers. None of this should be possible. There was a long pause before Chen responded. Captain Hess, what do you know about human history? The question seemed to come from nowhere, but Hess tried to answer honestly. Not much. You're a relatively new species to the galactic community. Your planet is supposedly quite dangerous, but most worlds have some hostile environments. Our entire planet is a hostile environment, Chen said quietly. Every square kilometer of Earth is actively trying to kill everything that lives on it. The weather, the geology, the biology, all of it evolved to be as deadly as possible. Most species develop technology to make their lives easier. We develop technology to stay alive. Hess felt a chill run down her spine. What are you saying? I'm saying that when your species spends 100,000 years being hunted by everything from bacteria to natural disasters, you tend to develop a different perspective on things like survival and warfare. The weapons and defenses you just witnessed aren't advanced alien technology or exotic physics. They're the result of a species that learned to turn necessity into an art form. But surely other species have faced similar challenges. Have they? Chen interrupted. Tell me, Captain, what's the most dangerous predator on your homeworld? Hess thought for a moment. The Shadow Claw. They're pack hunters, about twice the size of my species, with natural armor and razor-sharp claws. On Earth, we have creatures that make your shadow claws look like gentle pets. We have predators that hunt in packs of hundreds, toxins that can kill in seconds, and weather patterns that can level entire cities without warning. And those are just the things we consider normal. The implications of Chen's words began to sink in. If humans had evolved on a world where such conditions were considered normal, what did that say about their capacity for warfare? The point I'm trying to make, Chen continued, is that humans don't fight because we enjoy it. We fight because it's the only way we know how to solve problems. When you threatened our clients, you weren't challenging a military force. You were triggering a survival response that's been refined over millions of years of evolution. And that's why the mercenary guilds fear you, Hess realized. That's why they should fear us, Chen corrected. We don't want to fight the galaxy's mercenaries. We just want to do our job. But if someone forces us to choose between our client's safety and avoiding conflict... She let the sentence hang unfinished. As the remaining mercenary ships completed their withdrawal from the system, news of the engagement spread through the galactic communication networks. Within hours, every mercenary guild, military organization, and private security firm in known space had received detailed reports of what had happened at Kepler-7. The reaction was immediate and universal. No mercenary fleet would accept a contract that might put them in opposition to human forces. But for the miners of Kepler-7, who had spent weeks living in fear of the Federation's mercenary fleet, the sight of 3 modest human ships calmly patrolling their system represented something they had almost given up hope of finding: safety. Commander Chen stood on her bridge, watching the tactical display as her ships settled into a standard patrol pattern around the mining colonies. The mission was far from over. They still needed to negotiate a peaceful resolution to the miners' dispute with the Federation. But the first phase was complete. Commander, Lieutenant Rodriguez reported, we're receiving gratitude messages from all 7 mining colonies. They want to know if there's anything they can do to repay us. Chen smiled. Tell them that seeing them safe is payment enough. We're here to do a job, not to be heroes. But across the galaxy, in the planning rooms of mercenary guilds and the briefing chambers of military academies, humans were already being discussed in very different terms. They weren't just another species with advanced technology. They were something new, something unprecedented. They were the species that had turned survival into an art form and warfare into a science, and they had just announced their arrival on the galactic stage in a way that no one would ever forget. The galaxy's Mercs will fight anything. Except human warships. Part 3. 3 weeks after the Kepler-7 incident, the Galactic Mercenary Guild held an emergency assembly on Nexus Prime. Representatives from over 400 mercenary organizations gathered in the massive station's central amphitheater, all seeking answers to the same question. What were they going to do about the human problem? Guildmaster Thainok, a massive Gorvani whose species had dominated the mercenary trade for over 2 centuries, stood at the center of the assembly. His forearms gestured emphatically as he addressed the crowd. "Fellow warriors," his deep voice echoed through the chamber, "we face an unprecedented threat to our way of life. In the span of 3 weeks, 96% of our contracts have been canceled due to the possibility of human involvement." A murmur of agreement rippled through the assembled crowd. Each representative had similar stories. Clients who had hired mercenaries for decades were now seeking alternative solutions, all because of rumors that humans might become involved. "The humans have shown us technology that defies explanation," Thainok continued. "Weapons that unmake matter, defenses that ignore energy, ships that move without traveling. But more than that, they have shown us something far more dangerous. They cannot be intimidated." Captain Hess stood from her seat in the audience. After the Kepler-7 incident, she had been elected as spokesperson for the Mid-Rim Mercenary Coalition, one of the largest organizations in the Guild. "Guildmaster," she called out, "I was there when they destroyed the Bone Crusher. What I witnessed wasn't just superior technology. It was a completely different approach to warfare. They didn't fight like soldiers or mercenaries. They fought like—" She paused, struggling to find the right words. "Like what, Captain?" Thainok prompted. "Like apex predators. Everything they did was efficient, precise, and absolutely without mercy or hesitation. When they decided to act, they acted. No posturing, no threats, no negotiation, just immediate, overwhelming response." Another captain, a Zalithian named Korax, stood up from across the amphitheater. "But they're just 3 ships. How can 3 ships threaten the entire mercenary trade?" Before Hess could respond, the chamber's main communication system activated. A holographic display appeared above the assembly, showing the face of a human female in what appeared to be a military uniform. "Greetings," the human said with a polite smile. "I am Admiral Rebecca Torres, commander of the Earth Defense Fleet's Diplomatic Security Division. I understand you're having a meeting about us." The amphitheater fell silent. The idea that the humans had somehow accessed their private communication networks was terrifying enough, but the casual way the Admiral had done it suggested a level of technological infiltration that made their earlier demonstrations seem minor by comparison. "How did you—" Thainok began, but the Admiral held up a hand. "Please, Guildmaster Thainok, let me save us all some time. We know about this meeting because we monitor all communications that might affect Earth's interests. We know about the contract cancellations, the emergency protocols, and the various plans being discussed to deal with what you're calling the human problem." She leaned forward slightly, and her smile faded. "What I want to know is why you think there is a human problem." Captain Hess found her voice first. "Admiral Torres, with respect, your ships have demonstrated capabilities that make conventional military resistance pointless. The entire foundation of the mercenary trade is built on the idea that conflicts can be resolved through superior force or tactics. What happens to our profession when one side has technology that's functionally magical?" "That's a fair question," Torres acknowledged. "But let me ask you one in return. What makes you think we want to put you out of business?" The question caught the assembly off guard. For weeks, they had been operating under the assumption that humanity's long-term goal was to replace the mercenary guilds with their own forces. Consider the facts, Torres continued. In the 3 weeks since Kepler-7, how many human ships have been deployed in mercenary-type operations? Thainok consulted his datapad. According to our intelligence, none. Correct. And how many requests has Earth received to provide military assistance to various factions? Our sources indicate over 2,000 requests in the past week alone. Also correct. And how many of those requests have we accepted? The Guildmaster's expression grew puzzled. None. You've declined every single contract offer. Torres nodded. Now, does that sound like the behavior of a species trying to corner the galactic security market? Captain Corax stood up again. Then what do you want? Why demonstrate such overwhelming force if you don't intend to use it? Because, Torres said simply, we learned a long time ago that the best way to win a fight is to make sure it never happens in the first place. Overwhelming force prevents conflict better than any amount of negotiation or diplomacy. She gestured to something off-screen, and the holographic display expanded to show a star chart of the local galactic sector. In the 3 weeks since Kepler-7, armed conflicts in this sector have decreased by 73%. Piracy is down 85%. Civilian casualties from mercenary operations have dropped to nearly zero. Would you like to know why? The assembly waited in silence. Because, for the first time in galactic history, potential aggressors have to consider the possibility that their actions might attract human attention. The mere possibility that one of our ships might become involved is enough to make most people reconsider their options. Guildmaster Thainok leaned forward in his chair. You're saying that you're reducing conflicts simply by existing? I'm saying that fear is often more effective than force. Your mercenary guilds have operated for centuries on the principle that superior firepower can resolve any dispute, but you've always had to actually use that firepower to prove your point. We've achieved the same result by demonstrating our capabilities once and then letting imagination do the rest. Captain Hess felt a chill of understanding. You're not trying to replace us. You're trying to make us obsolete. Not at all, Torres replied. We're trying to make large-scale conflicts obsolete. There's a difference. She manipulated her controls, and the display changed to show detailed statistics on mercenary operations over the past several decades. Look at your own data. The vast majority of mercenary contracts involve disputes that could be resolved through negotiation if both sides weren't convinced that violence was their only option. Remove the option of violence or make it prohibitively risky, and suddenly people become much more willing to talk. But what about legitimate security needs? Asked another captain. Piracy, rebellion, territorial disputes. These problems won't disappear just because people are afraid of humans. You're absolutely right, Torres agreed. And that's where you come in. The Admiral's expression became more serious. Earth has no interest in becoming the galaxy's police force. We have our own problems to deal with, and frankly, we prefer to be left alone. But we also can't ignore situations where our allies are threatened or where conflicts threaten interstellar stability. She paused, choosing her words carefully. What we're proposing is a partnership. The mercenary guilds continue to operate as they always have, providing security services and conflict resolution. But with a new understanding, any operation that threatens civilians, involves unnecessary destruction, or targets our allies will attract human attention. And if it attracts human attention, Thainok asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Then it stops, Torres said simply. Immediately and permanently. The implications were staggering. The humans were essentially offering to serve as the ultimate deterrent against the worst excesses of mercenary warfare, while allowing the legitimate security trade to continue operating. What's in it for you? Captain Hess asked suspiciously. This arrangement gives you enormous influence over galactic conflicts without requiring any significant commitment of resources. Torres smiled again, and this time there was genuine warmth in the expression. "Captain Hess, you're thinking like a human. What's in it for us is peace and quiet. Every conflict we prevent is one less potential threat to Earth and our allies. Every mercenary operation that conducts itself professionally is one less reason for us to get involved in galactic politics." "But surely you must want something more concrete," Korax protested. "Trade agreements, territorial concessions, preferred status." "Captain," Torres interrupted gently, "let me share something with you about human psychology. We're not an expansionist species. We don't want to rule the galaxy or extract tribute from other worlds. What we want is to be left alone to develop our own civilization in peace." She gestured to the data displays around her. "Every minute we spend policing galactic conflicts is time we're not spending on exploration, research, or cultural development. Every ship we deploy in a combat role is a ship that's not mapping new star systems or investigating scientific anomalies." The assembled mercenaries began to understand. Humans weren't seeking to dominate the galaxy through military force. They were seeking to minimize their military commitments so they could focus on other pursuits. "Think of it as a business proposition," Torres continued. "We provide the ultimate deterrent against large-scale conflict, and you provide day-to-day security services within a framework that discourages unnecessary violence. Everyone benefits." Guildmaster Thainok stood slowly. "Admiral Torres, your proposal has merit, but it also raises concerns. How do we know that humanity won't eventually decide to expand its influence? How do we know that this partnership won't gradually evolve into domination?" "Because," Torres said, "we've already proven that we could dominate if we wanted to. The technology you witnessed at Kepler-7 represents less than 1% of our actual military capability. If we wanted to conquer the galaxy, we wouldn't need to negotiate with anyone." The silence that followed this statement was profound. The assembled mercenaries had all assumed that the human ships at Kepler-7 represented the pinnacle of their technology. The idea that those devastating capabilities were merely a small fraction of human military potential was almost incomprehensible. "What are you people?" whispered one of the representatives. Torres's expression grew thoughtful. "We're survivors, Captain. We evolved on a world that taught us that the universe is fundamentally hostile to life, and that survival requires constant vigilance, adaptation, and the occasional application of overwhelming force. But we also learned that the best way to ensure our own survival is to create an environment where everyone can thrive." She gestured to the star chart again. "The galaxy is a dangerous place. There are species that view other sentient life as resources to be exploited, civilizations that expand through conquest and subjugation, and countless smaller threats that prey on the weak and vulnerable. Left unchecked, these threats will eventually reach Earth." "So you're protecting yourselves by protecting everyone else," Hess realized. "Exactly. It's enlightened self-interest. The stronger and more stable the galactic community becomes, the less likely we are to face existential threats in the future." Admiral Torres stood up behind her desk, and the camera angle adjusted to show her full uniform. The insignia and decorations were unlike anything the assembled mercenaries had seen, but their meaning was clear. This was someone who had seen combat on a scale they could barely imagine. "I want to be very clear about something," Torres said, her voice taking on a formal tone. "The partnership I'm proposing is voluntary. We will not force compliance, and we will not punish those who choose not to participate. But we will respond to threats against our allies and to actions that destabilize interstellar peace." She paused, letting the implications sink in. "The choice is yours. Continue operating as you always have, with the understanding that excessive violence or threats to civilians may attract unwanted attention, or work with us to create a more stable and prosperous galaxy for everyone." Guildmaster Thainok looked around the amphitheater at the hundreds of representatives. The fear in their eyes was still there. but it was gradually being replaced by something else. Opportunity. Admiral Torres, speaking for the Galactic Mercenary Guild, we would like to enter into formal negotiations regarding this partnership. Torres smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. I'll have our diplomatic team contact you within the week to begin working out the details. The holographic display began to fade, but Torres held up one final hand. Oh, and Guildmaster? The miners at Kepler-7 have asked me to pass along a message. They're very grateful for your restraint during the recent incident, and they'd like to offer the first contract under our new arrangement, peaceful arbitration of their dispute with the Centauri Federation. As the image disappeared, the amphitheater erupted in conversation. Representatives huddled in groups, discussing the implications of what they had just heard. The human proposal would fundamentally change the nature of the mercenary trade, but it might also ensure its survival in a galaxy where traditional military conflict was becoming increasingly obsolete. Captain Hess found herself approached by dozens of other captains, all wanting her first-hand account of the Kepler-7 incident. But as she answered their questions, her mind kept returning to something Admiral Torres had said. The technology they had witnessed represented less than 1% of human military capability. If that was true, then the galaxy was dealing with something unprecedented in known history. A species with the power to dominate through force, but the wisdom to choose cooperation instead. For the first time since Kepler-7, Captain Hess felt something other than fear when she thought about humanity's place in the galaxy. She felt hope. 6 months later, the Kepler-7 Accords would be signed by over 3,000 mercenary organizations, establishing the framework for what historians would later call the Great Peace, a period of unprecedented galactic stability that lasted for over 2 centuries. And it all began because 3 human ships had proven that sometimes the most powerful weapon is the one you never have to use. The age of mercenary warfare was ending, not with conquest or defeat, but with the recognition that there were better ways to resolve conflicts than through force of arms. Humanity had taught the galaxy a lesson that would echo through the ages. True strength lies not in the ability to destroy your enemies, but in the wisdom to turn them into allies. The miners of Kepler-7 were free. The mercenary guilds had found a new purpose. And somewhere in the depths of space, 3 modest human warships continued their patrol, a quiet reminder that some things are worth protecting, and that protection doesn't always require violence. Sometimes it just requires making sure everyone understands what violence would cost.